Welcome to KAWA History and Political Education Lesson 2. Sources of History for S1. By the end of this lesson you should be able to 1. Classify the sources of history. 2. Explain the primary sources of history. 3. Identify the secondary sources of sources. 4. Describe the scientific sources of history. Introduction. Historical source is the original information that contains important historical information. These sources inform us about history at the most basic level, and these sources are used as clues in order to study about our past events. This historical information can be obtained from sources like the oral traditions, archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, videos, written documents, museums, traditional folk songs, monuments, among others. These sources are classified into primary, secondary, and scientific forms. Primary sources. This is first-hand information obtained from the persons who witnessed the historical event. These people provide first-hand evidence about what happened on an event, object, or to a person. This makes them more accurate in providing the correct history to us. The common primary sources we rely on include the oral traditions of storytelling, tape recorder, photos, lab reports, experiments, observations. Such information is acquired through the first person's accounts found in diaries, memoirs, letters, interviews, speeches, and others. Activity 1. Gathering historical information. 1. Why do you think the primary sources are the most reliable sources of history? 2. What are the weaknesses of this source of information? 3. Suggest ways of overcoming weaknesses of this method. Secondary sources. This is known as second-hand information. Secondary sources are usually produced after an event has occurred. It contains information that has been interpreted, commented on, analyzed, and processed from the original information. The common source of such information include historical research project. Secondary sources are generally scholarly books and articles. A secondary source interprets and analyzes the primary sources. These sources are one or more steps removed from the event. Secondary sources may contain pictures, quotes, or graphics of primary sources. Figure 2.2 to 2.5 are examples of secondary sources. Secondary sources of historical information include manuscript collections, collected writings, notes, letters, and other unpublished works. When Ms. Monica watches a movie and explains to her friends at school what it was about, that is an example of secondary source of information. The person who saw the movie being authored, developed, acted is a primary source. Activity 2. 1. Describe a situation through which you can teach your guardian/parent about a secondary source of historical information. 2. Outline the benefits of using the secondary source of historical information. 3. What can be the challenges of such sources of historical information? Scientific source of history. Science has mainly relied on the findings of archaeology to trace our history. The leading person under this study was called Dr. Leakey with his wife, Mary. Archaeology is the study of the material remains used by man many years ago. The remains are termed as fossils. Some of the material remains are the tools used by early people, which include spears, bows, arrows, chisels, hammer, among others. See Figure 2.6 below. People who study these fossils are called archaeologists. Archaeologists dig deep to excavate and study the artifacts, tools, pottery, sculptures, paintings, buildings, among others. They use scientific methods to evaluate their work. For example, Dr. Leakey and his wife, Mary, whose pictures are seen in Figure 2.7 below, provide a good example of archaeologists in East Africa. Some key excavations that took place in East Africa include Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, Bigabyamugyeni in present day, Sembabule in Masaka and Magosi in Karamoja, Northeast Uganda. Activity 3. 1. Explain the benefits of using the scientific method in finding out about our past. 2. Other than archaeology, give other scientific methods we can rely on to study our past. Summary. There are many sources of history, and all of them can be reliable if their risks are minimized in course of their use. Follow-up activity. 1. Other than the primary, secondary and scientific sources of history seen in this topic, list other ways through which one can find out about the past. 2. Prepare an interview guide that you would like to ask an elder how cultural morals were taught to young people before the introduction of formal education.